Hey everyone, welcome to Physics 306. I'm going to be the instructor, Mr. Clow. Um, I just want to do a quick little video where I lay out basically what to expect for this course. Now, one thing I did want to point out is currently I'm recording these videos few months in advance, so things may change as we get closer. I will notify you of any changes, so just keep an ear out for any messages on some of the platforms I'm going to mention in a second. So this is pretty much how I'm going to be doing a lot of my lectures. I'll be recording videos and you'll be able to watch it at your leisure. Just want to make sure that you kind of keep track with us and are able to finish the material before the time for the test. All right. So as I said, this is going to be a quick little layout of what to expect. So first thing that I want to mention is that there are three different websites that I want you to join. That I'm kind of going to be using for this class. The first is Remind. So Remind is for those who don't know, it's well, it could be an app on your phone, but it's a platform that essentially allows for very quick and easy communication between me and you. This is really going to be my main source of communication. I may not respond to emails very quickly, but with Remind, it's a lot easier for me to not only respond to you very quickly, but to also do mass blanket messages. And these messages will end up going towards your phone as long as you have notifications set up and you have it set up where it will actually go to your phone. So that's kind of why I like using this. This is where most of my important announcements are going to be on. So if I have a last minute change to a test, last minute change to a homework assignment or something, it's going to be on Remind. So you want to make sure that you join this as soon as possible. Um, and like I said, if you have any questions or problems, responding to me on here will be a lot quicker and easier than through email. Since a lot of times with email, I tend to have to be at a computer to respond to it, unlike here where I can actually do this from my phone. The second website that I want you to join is Edpuzzle. So Edpuzzle is going to be where I post a lot of my lecture videos, and this is actually going to be how I take attendance. Basically, what's going to happen is you go onto the website, you create an account, you put in this code, and it'll go to my classroom, and you'll see videos that pop up. And as you watch the video, you'll end up getting questions that ask you, like homework, like some of the questions that pop up. I'm going to try to limit the videos lengths to be about 30 minutes, but I can't guarantee that. Um, One thing I did want to point out is don't worry about getting questions right or wrong. I'm using it for myself to make sure that you guys are on the right track and have an idea of what's going on versus, if a lot of people are getting certain questions wrong, I know kind of to cover that in my little office hour videos. Um, Oh, one thing I wanted to point out is make sure that you watch the video in its entirety. So I did notice in some of the other classes that a lot of kids were just skipping to the question parts and not really watching the in between. I do recommend first, it won't actually mark it as being submitted unless you watch the whole thing. But the other reason why I want you to make sure that you watch everything is that even if you get the question right, you may end up missing out on important explanations on how I got to that or why I'm doing something the way it is. Um, One of my common phrases is that you want to make sure that you didn't get the answer serendipitously. A lot of times people will do a problem and they'll do some mumbo jumbo that they think kind of makes sense and they'll stumble onto the answer and they'll think, okay, I can do this all the time, but realistically it only really worked on that one case. It was a happy accident that it worked and not necessarily a thing that will always work all the time. So just want to throw that out there that, just listen to every part, even my explanations on questions that you get right. And then the last one is Google Classroom. The code's here. This is just where all my slides are going to be posted. So while Edpuzzle is going to have my lecture videos where you can watch, and this is how I do attendance. If you want to actually review the videos, because I don't know if you can rewatch an Edpuzzle, you can feel free to go to the Google Class to actually see a lot of the documents. In fact, I'll be posting things like class schedules, the syllabus, everything like that. It'll be posted on here. At, while I'm on the topic of the syllabus, I did want to actually quickly mention that I know that the syllabus has been posted on Stony Brook's website. I did want to point out that there have been some changes due to the fact that that was done even months before this video is recording. So almost half a year ago, right when they knew that they were closing, but they weren't really sure how everything was going to work out, I had to have my syllabus already submitted. So I just want to point out that that's why I said make sure that you're coming to the Remind, you're watching these videos, because you never know when something changes. All right, so these are the required materials. So there's a textbook for this course, I hope it says on Solar. The book is the Thermal Physics textbook by Kittle and Cromer. It's second edition. Um, we're going to be working from chapters 1 to 8 on this. So this is the undergraduate thermodynamics and statistical mechanics course. So that's what this textbook is going to be covering. A lot of most of my lecture slides really do cover the textbook almost in its entirety. So, a lot of the concepts that are in there, I'm covering. They're important. There are some things that I kind of skip. Feel free to read through them, but they're usually not completely necessary. Um, I do recommend that you do try to read the textbook before you watch my videos, mainly because there are some things that may make sense to you in the first reading, but then getting an additional foundation and explanation from someone else may end up solidifying and making your understanding more concrete in your mind. So you do it is good to read the textbook, even though I will admit the wording can get a little bit jarring sometimes. In addition, this is where actually a lot of the homework questions are going to be from the thermal textbook. Now, one thing I did want to point out, because a little bit about this topic is, I mentioned it's thermodynamics and statistical mechanics. Now, if you've taken, as I'm sure everyone's in this class has taken a previous physics or chemistry course where you've probably learned thermodynamics and things like PV equals nRT and all those stuff, um, um, that stuff that you learned in those classes, those were basically focusing on what we call the macroscopic properties, things like pressure and temperature and energy, and volume, things that you can see from, I guess you could say, the human scale. What we're going to do here, though, is we're actually going to kind of re-derive all the equations. As I said, the ideal gas law, things like with entropy, all that, we're going to derive it coming from a microscopic thought process where we're going to be looking at all the particles that are going along in this scenario, all their positions, their velocities, looking at the nitty gritty microscopic level. Um, and because of the fact that we're going to be dealing with fairly quote unquote large samples of gases um, or materials and substances, we're going to end up having billions and billions and trillions of particles. So we're going to end up having to use what's called a statistical approach. And you'll see how we kind of end up developing a lot of these macroscopic equations from a microscopic mindset. Now for the grading, all my grades will be posted almost immediately on Blackboard. So the moment I get something graded, it's up on Blackboard. I know there are some classes where the teacher waits, until the very end of the year to post stuff. I'm gonna have it right away. In fact, I'll probably have something posted later on, probably halfway through the course, that will give you a good idea of what type of letter grade you're going to be getting in this class if you continue getting what you're getting. Now, the weights will be as followed. The final exam is going to count as 45%, the midterm is going to count as 35%, and the homework is going to count as 20%. Now, there has been a slight change in the tests. Originally, each of the midterms covered 4 chapters, and then the final was, cumulative, covered all the topics again. Um, I am going to change this, however, because we were informed that we want to make tests shorter. So what I did was I took all these tests and split them in half. So each test now, each of the midterms are now split into tests that are going to cover 2 chapters. So there's going to be 4 tests, and there's going to be 2 quote finals where I'm going to be covering basically this. In fact, you can almost think of the final as being 2 midterms. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what we're going to end up doing for this. The dates for the exams will be on a class schedule that you can look at later. Then homeworks will be worth 20%. All right, so as far as the lecture goes, because this is a summer course, this is a very fast-paced class. Each of the lectures are going to cover 1 week's worth of material, which is going to be essentially 1 chapter. Now, as I said, when I record these videos, I'm going to try my best to make the videos as short as possible, to make them 30 minutes long. Um, but so you might end up seeing, the lectures have 4 parts that are related to 1 chapter. Um, this goes back to what I was saying before about how not every single thing in the textbook is going to be in that chapter is going to be discussed in this. Like I said, if you want, feel free to look through it. I do recommend that you read the chapters beforehand and try to actually uh, understand it yourself. That actually does also help in um, improving your cognition and your memorization, your understanding of the topic, is by going through the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out what they're saying and what it even means. And then you can watch my videos for a further explanation to further um, give an understanding to it. And that will kind of help solidify it even more. So, like I said, I do recommend both parts. As I said before, attendance for this class is not mandatory. It's recommended. So, as I said with the ed puzzles, they're not. It's not necessary that you do them, but I'm only going to be using them as lectures, as attendance wise, and it's going to be meant for me to know, who's actually watching the videos and what issues people are having with them. But it will not affect your grade at all. And like I said, all my slides and files are going to be posted on the Google Classroom. Edpuzzle will have some of the videos that you can watch, but Google Classroom pretty much has everything. Video meetings. So I will be hosting virtual meetings Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 10 a.m. Now, I may end up changing this time depending on student input. So if a lot of kids decide that because of this whole situation, it's better for them to have it at in a later time, then I'll move it to that time. Just let me know. Actually, I will post a survey to ask everyone to see what everyone thinks, and I'll make my decision later on. And like I said, I'll probably post that decision up on Remind. All right, so these meetings are completely optional, and it's really meant as a time for you to ask specific questions. Uh, One second. It's meant for you to ask specific questions about either the topic, from that chapter, homework, or any upcoming tests. So, uh, in my class schedule, I'll have, what days or what chapters I'll be going over on each day. So, for example, um, if you wanted me to go over chapter one, then there's a Monday and a Wednesday time where I'll pretty much dedicate to talking to about those chapters. So you may not have to come to every single one of those in order for you to get the effect. Um, and I will also make some other announcements on here. Like I said, with these meetings, they're optional. They're essentially office hours. They're not lectures. So, you know, we're gonna start it, and it's gonna be based mainly on your input. You guys asking me about something to go over or something to explain into more detail. So it's only worth as much as you guys put in. If you have a question, please do not hesitate to ask. Each of the exams will take place during normal class time at around 10 a.m. and will cover two chapters. You can see the class schedule for these dates. Though the exams will be heavily focused on the material, um, on those chapters, it is definitely worth looking at the previous material. And there's not going to be any multiple choice on these exams, so you need to make sure that you show all your work. All right, so as far as homework is concerned, all the homeworks are going to be assigned through Blackboard. At the end of the chapter, at the end of each of my lectures, I tend to post, very quick, these are the questions that you have to do. But essentially, if you want, you could just go onto Blackboard and you could see what questions are going to be done for each of the homeworks. I want you to be able to answer the questions. You could do it on a separate sheet of paper. You could do it on the computer, and then you're going to end up uploading onto Blackboard. Now, however you do the homework, make sure that you're neat with it. Uh, if you're going to do it on a separate sheet of paper and take a picture to upload it, make sure that that picture is very, very detailed. Make sure that it's, I can see everything. Hopefully, this is kind of my first time using Blackboard as a way of submitting in homeworks. So hopefully you should be able to submit multiple files. If not, if that ends up being an issue, let me know. You can feel free to email it to me afterwards, like any of the extra pages. But again, you're going to end up uploading everything through Blackboard. One thing I should mention is try to make sure that it's a file that can be read. It'd be nice to have the files uploaded as a PDF, but I have a PC. I don't have a Mac, so if you upload something in the form of pages, I won't be able to read it. So make sure it's done in some format. A JPEG image. I mean, I wouldn't like that, but sure. PDF, something that, like I said, I can read from my computer. Now, typically, the homework will be due pretty much 2 lecture days later. So, for example, if we finish a chapter according to my schedule on Wednesday, then it will be due Monday, which would be the second lecture day. However, again, these days may change, so always look at the Blackboard assignment for the official due date. I do recommend that you try working in groups. Just make sure that you don't copy. There's no point in copying because while my test questions won't come straight from the homework will end up covering material and have similar, parts that will end up popping up. So if you don't practice those types of questions, then when the test comes, you won't know how to do them. There are some helpful tips. So first off, the only way that you can learn physics, do physics, physics is not a passive class. It's not something that you can just sit back and watch someone else do and immediately know it. Just like it's like with gymnastics or fighting or a sports thing. You can't just watch someone do it, train, and then go, okay, now I can do that. If I watch the Olympics, I can't just watch people figure skating and go, okay, now I can do a triple jump and land on a single foot. I can do it because I saw someone else do it. Physics does require active participation. It requires you to strengthen your brain, which is technically a muscle, um, by constantly practicing more and more questions. So the best way to learn it is to do it. I do, like I said, I do recommend setting up some sort of study group or working with partners. I can't really stress how important this is. First, I do remember when I was going through school, um, it was always helpful when I had someone else that I can work with and bounce questions and ideas off of them. But it actually turns out that that's even more important because um, one thing that we learn in education is that the best way to actually prove that you understand it, and actually even the best way to make sure that you understand something, is to be forced to explain it to someone else. So a lot of times if you're working in a group, even if you are the strongest person in that group and you are the person who knows everything, by forcing you to have to explain it to other people with different thoughts and different understandings, then it forces you to actually find uh, a better understanding of it, and it ends up really solidifying it and making you really understand it. A good example of that is I remember when I was taking a chemistry class, I was in a recitation group and I was doing really well on all my tests. I was getting above 90, like high 90s when the average was like a 60 or a 65. It was a complete joke. And I remember one of the units was titration. I remember having a lot of trouble with it due to the equations kind of constantly changing depending on how it was titrating. Um, and I was in a group, and clearly I still probably would have ended up passing the class or that test, but I was afraid that that was going to be my lowest test. So I ended up being put in a group with a girl who really was struggling with the course. So I actually tried to explain the material to her. Whether or not she actually understood it doesn't really matter, because what does matter is that I ended up having epiphanies and further understanding the material to the point where I actually ended up getting 100 on that test. It was my highest and best test in that class. So working in groups really does help for both people. For the people who are having trouble with the material, it gives them other avenues and other explanations that maybe I'm not conveying to them, that maybe they need some other way of explaining it to them that I'm not providing. But it also does help the good people because then they're having to explain the material and forcing them to better understand it themselves. I do recommend that you try to be organized with when you're doing notes and problems. Clearly, all my videos are online, so you don't technically need to write anything down. But again, writing things down really does offer or force you to kind of have a little bit more of an active participation in the class. Remember, best way to learn physics is to do it. So writing it down does at least provide a little bit of activeness in the learning process. Um, so you want to make sure that you're organized with it because if you're you know uh, messy, it's going to be really hard for you to kind of look back in your notes. But also, when I'm grading stuff, I don't want to play Where's Waldo to figure out where your answers are. So if you have everything organized, it'll be a lot easier for me to find out, what things you've put, what things are right, what things are wrong, and all that stuff. If it's messy, I may end up giving up after a minute of searching and trying to figure out what's going on. And as I said, ask for help. Feel free to go on to Remind and ask me for any sort of communication. I remember when I was going through school there, I was kind of always afraid of asking questions to the teachers. So I just want to kind of reiterate that I am perfectly happy with answering questions when whenever you ask. One thing I do want to point out though is that depending on when you ask me the question, it may take me a while to respond. So feel free to throw in other sort of kind of messages in case I forget. So, if I don't respond after 2 hours, feel free to send another message of saying, hey, just wanted to clarify, did you end up getting my, question before or something like that. So feel free to, ask for any help that you have. All right. If you have any questions, again, send me a message to Remind. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. All right. Bye.